Hello and welcome. Today I'll be showing you part 1 of a series of tutorials using a different technique in each video to create an ombre effect on a cake. So the materials I've got here today are some dark purple fondant, some white fondant. I've also got a modelling tool, but really all I'm interested in is the back end tip there. I've got my rolling pin, a pizza cutter, I've got some flour glue and also a fondant cutter. I've also got some wax paper as well as a cake which I've already covered in fondant. So let's get started. I'm going to work on creating 5 frilled or ruffle layers on my cake today. So the first thing I need to do is roll out my white fondant and section it into 5 even pieces. Next I'm going to divide my purple fondant amongst my white pieces of fondant, starting with a small piece for the first piece of fondant, a little bit more for the second piece, and gradually increasing the amount of purple fondant until I give the most to the 5th piece. Next I'm going to combine each group of fondant with the purple and white that I've allocated and make sure it blends really well together to create a nice shade of purple. Once I've laid out my 5 shades of purple, I'm just going to put 4 of them into some airtight bags so that they don't dry out, and I'll leave the darkest one out because that's the one I'm going to use first. So I'll just move these 4 other coloured fondants to the side and I can start to roll out the first piece of fondant. So I'm going to roll this out to about 2 mil thick. I don't want it too thin because it could tear, and then I'm just going to neaten off the top edge there. And you can see here that I've got a straight edge and a wrinkly edge, but it doesn't really matter. You could use your pizza cutter to cut 2 straight edges. So once I've done this, I'm just going to remove off the excess on the side and the centre. And then I've carefully transferred the fondant strips onto my sheet of wax paper, and I've just trimmed off the edges here in line with my paper because I found it easier to move the sheet of wax paper around if my fondant wasn't hanging over the side and sticking to the table. Now I've got my modelling tool here. The reason I chose this was because it's a very smooth tip on the end. You could use the end of a paintbrush or a toothpick or anything that's smooth and round. So I'm going to work my way down the strip of fondant, pressing gently and rolling my tool backwards and forwards. I'm not going to press too hard because if I use too much force I'm going to rip straight through the fondant, and I want to leave the same gap at the top of the fondant all the way down the strip. So I'm going to continue this technique of pressing and rolling back and forth until I've finished this strip and the second strip. You can see that the frill starts to appear straight away as we start doing this technique. Now I'm going to take my flour glue and my paintbrush and put a small amount of the flour glue in a line right around the cake, and it's going to be at the height which is about the same height as the height of my frill would be. Don't put too much flour glue, otherwise the frill's going to slip off when we try to attach it, so just a little bit, enough to adhere it and make it stick. So I'm going to position my first frill in place, so gently wrapping it around the cake and letting it just gently stick to the cake itself. Use your fingers to give it a little press right around the edge, and then as the frill didn't go all the way completely around, we've got to turn it around and put the back piece on. So that's just a matter of overlapping each end, and then with my pizza cutter I've then just trimmed off the excess. I think a knife would be easier, and for the rest of the cake I grabbed a knife to do this. So I've just neatened off my cut edge and blended the top piece. Now I'm going to start work on the second frill using the next lightest shade of purple, following the same steps we did for the first frill by rolling out the fondant, cutting out the 2 strips, using my modelling tool to create my frill. Then I've got to put the flour glue onto the cake and gently wrap my frill around the cake, the front and the join at the back. Hopefully by this stage you're getting used to the process, and we're just going to continue using each piece of lighter purple fondant that we created at the beginning to bring our ruffles up to the top. This ruffle technique can be used from lighter to darker or darker to lightest, whatever takes your fancy. And once you've put your last ruffle in place, you've created a simple and elegant looking cake using the ruffle technique to create an ombre effect on your cake. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Stay tuned for part 2 in my ombre series using a different technique. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to click on the link below to subscribe to my channel for more great video tutorials.